I'm always very pleased to speak in this House during Black History Month, and I say that not out of ceremony but because of conviction, because I believe it matters for Black Britons watching today to see this Parliament take time to reflect on our history, our struggles and our contributions. It matters that our story is not confined to footnotes or commemorative months, but recognised as part of the very fabric of British history. Each October, I believe that this debate should be on the order paper as a matter of course, yet too often it has been absent and depending on the will of a few determined members. So let me thank all of those involved in ensuring that this debate takes place during government time. Now, many of my colleagues have and will rightfully use their opportunity to honour the giants of Black British history, the leaders, thinkers and ordinary people who achieved extraordinary things, often in the face of unimaginable obstacles, and I pay tribute to them all. But today I want to use my time differently, and I want to speak frankly about why decades after the Civil Rights Movement, years after Black Lives Matter brought millions to the streets, we have still not tackled racism in this country and beyond. And I want to say plainly that we have not tackled racism because we have not fully committed to repairing the inequality that we had a part in creating. We have not committed to reparatory justice. In 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, more than 240,000 people signed a petition calling on the government to include Britain's role in colonialism and enslavement in the national curriculum. It became one of the most signed petitions ever submitted to this Parliament at the time, and that moment felt like a turning point. I sat in the debate that followed, and I remember the sense of hope that at last we would be honest about our past, honest about the empire that built Britain's wealth, and honest about the lives that it destroyed, because hundreds of thousands of British people wanted it. Yet 5 years on, and 39 years since Black History Month was founded in the UK, very little has changed. Britain's colonial past is still treated as an optional topic, not a foundational one. Black British history is still squeezed into 1 month, and often taught only by those teachers who go above and beyond using their own time and resources. Many young people grow up learning in history a lot about our monarchy and not about our empire. Now, this is important. I think our monarchy and the history on it speaks to how our country came to be, and some might be surprised to hear that I am a fan of the odd period drama. And I think these stories are very, very interesting. But it has to be wrong that some also never hear about Queen Nanny of the Maroons, Mary Prince, Olude Equiano, and the Bristol bus boycotts, or even the role of the British state in the enslavement of millions. This also speaks to the fact that our country does not want to engage with some of these issues. Now, young people are taught about industrial innovation, but not about who paid the human cost for that progress. Now, this cherry picking of what to teach points to something more worrying, because we also miss out on learning about other working class struggles like the miners' strikes, the suffragettes, those stories that educate on the power that we hold as citizens and the things that people have done to challenge injustice. And we cannot say that this nation is facing a history when it still refuses to teach it fully. Now, we have talked a lot about patriotism recently, and let me be clear, I don't believe that patriotism is pretending our history was glorious and benign. Patriotism is about being honest enough to confront the truth, because only a nation unafraid of the truth can hope to build a just future. I believe that in order to stand firm in pride and power, as the theme of this Black History Month asks, we must address these issues, because where is the pride in not recognising you're wrong, and where is the power in not tackling in global justices that have failed to be repaired? Madam Deputy Speaker, last night I had the honour of delivering the National Union of Journalists Claudia Jones Memorial Lecture. Claudia Jones, the journalist, activist and the mother of the Notting Hill Carnival, taught us something very powerful. She taught us that the struggle against racism can never be separated from the struggle against imperialism. She wrote that imperialism is the root cause of racism, is the ideology which upholds colonial rule and exploitation. That is not just a historical observation, it's a diagnosis of the present. Because when far-right politics rise across Europe, when migrants are scapegoated, when global inequalities widen, Claudia Jones's words feel prophetic. She understood that racism at its root is not about personal prejudice or isolated ignorance. Too often we try and reduce it to that few bad apples argument. Racism is structural. It is the operating system of an economic and political order built through empire that exists today. It is the logic that justified and still justifies stolen land, stolen labour and stolen wealth. It is the logic that said that some people are disposable so that others might prosper. Racism didn't appear by accident. It has no factual basis. Racism was engineered, and that's why I say you cannot dismantle racism without repair, because if racism is built into the economic foundations of this country, in land, in labour, in capital, then the remedy must also be material. You cannot tackle a problem without getting to its roots. And now, it wasn't enough for us to express deep regret and other platitudes. It wasn't enough for us to change a few names and statues and call it progress. We have to repair the harm structurally, economically, culturally, and politically. That is the very heart of the global movement for reparations. This year, the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Reparations, which I chair, hosted the third annual UK Reparations Conference. We saw hundreds of activists, scholars, lawyers and community leaders come together from across the world, and the message was clear, that the demand for repair is no longer a fringe issue, it's a moral and political necessity. And yet, in Britain, we still refuse to apologise for our role in enslavement and colonialism. We refuse to return stolen artefacts. We even refuse to return human remains, denying dignity even in death. We refuse to engage meaningfully with reparatory justice. And even last year, when the Commonwealth nations called for a mere discussion on reparatory justice, we said no. And what does that sound like, given the history of the Commonwealth? Our country has not apologised, it's not repaired, it's not made amends. But the tide is turning and young people are asking the right questions. Institutions are beginning to confront their own archives. The debate can no longer be buried or delayed. And we have to be clear that reparations is not only about money. How could it possibly be? If you think the call for reparations is a call for cash, then you haven't been listening. How can it be? What amount of money could ever really compensate for what happened, for one of the greatest crimes in human history, for enslavement, trafficking, genocide, ecocide, widespread theft, and everything in between? Reparations is about truth, it's about restitution, it's about transforming relationships between nations, between communities, and between the past and the present. Reparations is about acknowledging that Britain became one of the richest nations on earth, not just through industry and ingenuity, but through the extraction of human life and labour from Africa, the Caribbean, Asia and beyond. And when enslavement was abolished, it was not the formerly enslaved who received compensation, it was the enslavers. They were paid the modern equivalent of billions of pounds for the loss of human property, and British taxpayers, including Black Britons, finished paying off that debt in 2015. That is not a distant history, that is the present, and it's certainly the present in my tax-paying history. Meanwhile, the descendants of those who endured generations of forced labour received nothing, not even an apology, to this day. Their names were often erased from their story and the story of their own liberation. And freedom has been paraded as a gift. And when I talk about reparations, I'm the descendant of enslaved and colonised people, and often told that I should be grateful that Britain abolished the slave trade. Now, I am proud of the role that this country, my country, played in the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. But that alone can't be absolution. And I'm sorry, I just cannot see how, just because an arsonist feels guilty, that you would absolve them for starting the fire in the first place. The injustice that I speak of didn't end with this emancipation. It actually continued through colonial rule, through the Berlin Conference, that carved up Africa without a single African present, through artificial borders and economic dependency, through the extraction of resources that continues till today. It means that at the UN in 2025, African nations still had to get up and ask to be included in the UN Security Council, despite the fact that African and Caribbean nations make up the majority of the countries in the world. So when people ask why reparations, I ask in return, why did we ever think that freedom without repair was enough, or in fact, that it was freedom at all? Madam Deputy Speaker, in this Parliament, I am proud to be part of the legacy of the late great Bernie Grant, who stood in this very chamber and called for reparations when few dared to. Because without truth, there can be no justice, and without justice, there can be no healing. And that is why the APPG believes we need a commission for truth and reparative justice. Now, this commission would not simply investigate the past, it would examine how legacies of that past are alive in the present, in the racial wealth gap, in health inequalities, in educational disparities, in the over-policing of black communities. None of these patterns are accidental, they were built. And because they were built, they can and must be dismantled. But only if we have the political courage to do so. And to do that, we have to move away from this lazy and reductionist style of politics, which often talks about what we cannot do instead of talking about what we can. Every major institution in this country, banks, universities, the monarchy, museums, carry traces of wealth extracted through colonialism and enslavement. The evidence is in the bank ledgers, in the shipping records, in the foundations of buildings across this city. That history does not belong in footnotes. It belongs in how we shape our policies today. And no individual group needs permission to demand justice. The call for reparations is grounded in international law, in human rights, and in the moral truth that those who profit from crimes against humanity have a duty to repair them. This is not about guilt or unpicking the past, as I've been accused of doing previously. This is about responsibility. It's not about division, it's about healing, but healing cannot begin where the truth has not been told. And that's why the teaching of black history as British history is in itself reparatory. If we're serious about tackling racism, we have to be serious about this repair, because racism is not just about words or attitude, it's about material conditions, about who owns wealth, who holds power, who has access to housing, healthcare, to safety and to dignity. And racism persists because the harm has never been repaired. Now, the call for reparations has survived centuries because it speaks to something beyond politics. It speaks to the human need for recognition, for justice and dignity, and it speaks to the possibility of renewal, not just for those nations who were wronged, but for Britain itself, because Black Britons are part of that story. I could be the richest person in this country, rise to the highest office in this land, and understand that I will never escape racism, because by its very nature, until there is justice for every single person that looks like myself, nothing will change in that regard. Now, the world is changing, and our place in it is precarious if we do not change our attitude, which still feels rooted in empire. And I want our country, my country, to be looked on with respect and admiration, not because it never got anything wrong, but because we had the courage to put what we got wrong right. Thank you.